Good morning, Year 11. I hope you're well and having a lovely day. So firstly, really well done to all of those of you who submitted your speeches. It's still quite early in the day, so I haven't got all of them yet, but the ones I've seen look absolutely excellent. Really well written, sophisticated, amazing ideas, meeting the success criteria. So fantastic effort, and I'm sure the ones I get later on today will be just as good, if not even better. So really, really well done. Okay, so can you write the date and title, please? The title is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We're going to be thinking about the two aspects of that character. So for your do now, answer these questions, please. What do you think is the reason for the novel Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's continued popularity? And what do you think a Victorian audience would have found most shocking about it? Pause the video for a couple of minutes to answer these questions. So why is it still so popular? I would say it's because the key themes in Dr. Jekyll and Hyde are timeless. So thinking about the main theme of duality, everyone having a good and an evil side, that's something that goes on forever, because I would argue that as long as humanity exists, there will always be the two sides battling within us. We'll always have the good in us that desires to help people and be honourable and do the moral right thing, and there'll also be the dark side in us that wants to do the opposite, essentially, and be selfish and careless and do things that we know deep down are wrong, but there's that battle going on within us. So I would say that's a timeless theme, because even people who seem really wonderful and like they couldn't possibly have any darkness, as an older person and having met a lot of people, I can assure you that everyone does have those two sides. Some people hide it better than others and they put up a facade, a false front, but everyone's got the darkness in them as well as the goodness, even if it may not initially seem that way. And then, of course, the other themes are also relevant. So, secrecy, even in today's more liberal society, everyone has secrets. No one's entirely transparent, even with those closest to them. There's always something that we don't want other people to know about us. So, that whole insight into the external and internal persona. Reputation, I would argue reputation is even more important, you can argue, or as important as it was in the Victorian times. So with social media, Facebook, Instagram, I don't know anymore. I'm not that much, not that up to date. TikTok is the other one. People are always thinking about ways to boost their followers, get more likes, boost their reputation in that way. And even if it's maybe not more important than it was in Victorian times, it's easier to gauge your reputation more easily. I had to leave social media because I was getting obsessed with the number of likes I was getting or not getting on certain posts. And so I would say reputation, whilst being perhaps less important, is easier to gauge or establish. And that's why people become quite obsessed with it. How many people are following them? How many people are liking them? And that's why it's potentially quite a significant issue today as well. And of course, religion and supernatural, they're both really relevant today as well. Religion, perhaps less so. We're more of a secular society now, religion and the state being separated. Supernatural, there's always been an interest in that, but again, maybe it's died off slightly due to the increase of science. So, in terms of talking about continued popularity, you could talk about how all the themes are relevant today, though some more so than others. In terms of what a Victorian audience would have found shocking about it, you could talk about the idea of evolution. So they just had Darwin's theory of evolution established, and they were still getting to terms with the fact that they'd previously thought God made everyone in his own image and likeness, and so everyone was essentially good. And now we have to come to terms with the fact that everyone's got the good and bad side, and realizing just how bad that animalistic side could be was probably quite a shock to them. And also because they believed, or they tried to believe, that everyone's reputation was their true self, knowing or having exposed that sense of duality, the dark, shady things that were going on beneath the facade of respectability, they could have found that quite shocking as well. So pause the video to make sure you've made some notes. Okay, so for today's lesson, you'll need a pen, highlighter and ruler, your English literature book, and a copy of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So today's focus: man is not truly one, but truly two. One of the absolute key quotes you need to know because it epitomizes the sense of duality that pervades the novel. Is that the most shocking idea in the book? Or rather, is it the knowledge that two people are one, that the evil Mr. Hyde and the respectable Dr. Jekyll are the same man? What is the most frightening aspect of the creation of Hyde? So those are some key ideas we'll be thinking about. So for task 1, we're going to look at the character of Dr. Jekyll. To consider, what does Stevenson want the reader to think of Dr. Jekyll in the first few chapters, before the confession? Write down all you know about Dr. Jekyll and any quotes to support. You may look through your book to help. Pause the video for about 10 minutes to do this now. Okay, so these are things you may have written down. Make sure you have them all written down in your book. He's a well-qualified doctor. He's friends with Hyde. He is possibly being blackmailed by him. He is friends of Mr. Utterson and Dr. Lanyon. His views are that of Dr. Lanyon and that of Dr. Lanyon are very different. He seems very affected by Hyde's actions and acts suspiciously at times. He seems to be hiding something, but we don't know what. So pause the video to make sure you have all of this written down. Okay, task 2. Please could you read the description of Dr. Jekyll and the contextual information below? What does Stevenson want us to think about Dr. Jekyll? And what about his appearance hints that Jekyll might have another side to him? So we'll read through it together. To this rule, Dr. Jekyll was no exception, and as he now sat on the opposite side of the fire, a large, well-made, smooth-faced man of 50, with something of a slyish cast perhaps, but every mark of capacity and kindness. You could see by his looks that he cherished for Mr. Utterson a sincere and warm affection. So read through that, as well as the contextual information, and answer the questions. Pause the video to do that now. So in response to question 1, he wants us to think that he's perfectly respectable. He provides a stark contrast to Hyde. However, the slyish cast, a really key quote there, hints at another side to Jekyll, foreshadowing that there's some sense of duality in his nature. So remember, always think about the order ideas are introduced. That's why it's so important that you're doing your revision and rereading that novel and knowing where things go in the novel. And then in terms of the hint that he's got another side, yes, we've just talked about that. So make sure you've got that noted down. Okay, so task 3. What are we supposed to think about Dr. Jekyll from these quotes? What sides of science do Dr. Lanyon and Dr. Jekyll represent? So please could you read through them and answer those questions. Also, could you please read through that context? Okay, so task 4. I would like you to write down all you know about Mr. Hyde, appearance, behaviour and actions, and any quotes to support. You may look through your book to help you. As a challenge, add any contextual information to the points that you make about Hyde. Pause the video to do this now. So we know he's deformed looking without any nameable malformation, so there's nothing that you could pinpoint that's wrong with him, but there's just a feeling, and he just seems deformed. He is pale and dwarfish. So context, Victorians link deformity to criminals. So that's something we see with earlier Disney, isn't it? That characters who are deformed or don't look like most people look tend to be the villains. And that stems from the archaic, the old-fashioned view that people who had kind of darker souls, who were evil on the inside, that was manifested, that was shown on their exterior. but fortunately I think we're starting to move away from that nowadays. He has animalistic qualities: snarled, hissing intake of breath, savage laugh, something troglodytic, hardly human, trampled, ape-like fury, clubbed. Context: Victorians would have linked this to Charles Darwin's controversial theory of evolution, that we evolved from apes not made by God. He's evil-looking. So Victorians would have found this shocking, as they were a predominantly Christian society. He commits terrible crimes without provocation. Victorians were fearful of darker parts of London that were associated with crime. He is the product of a scientific experiment. Victorians were suspicious of new breakthroughs in science. We might all have a Hyde character inside us. Victorians were incredibly protective of their reputations and the need to act respectably at all times. So please make sure you have this all noted down. The reason I've put context for each of these points is because context is the hardest thing to get into your essays. Firstly, to remember to put it in there, which is why I get you to write out the checklist. And secondly, making it flow, weaving it organically into your answer can be quite challenging. So it's important to have a wide arsenal, as it were, of context so that you could pick a relevant point easily and insert it into your answer. Remember, you should have about 3 contextual references throughout your answer. So make sure you have this all written down. Okay, so the next task. The concept of duality is of course illustrated through the characters of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Make a list of where else in the novel duality is seen. For a challenge, what wider point was Stevenson making about society through these examples of duality? Pause the video to do this now. Okay, so we've got the 2 entrances to Dr. Jekyll's house, the poor condition of the door that Hyde uses compared to the street that it is in, the poor condition of the back door to Jekyll's house in contrast to the front door. In the streets of London, you've got the bustling, active side, and the darker, more crime-filled side, the end of the world. Dr. Lanyon and Dr. Jekyll's scientific views. Appearances can be deceptive. For example, Enfield and, of course, Jekyll. Victorian society was hypocritical and double standards existed. So make sure you have this noted down in your book. And finally, I would like you to read through these questions and write down the answers in your book. Pause the video for 10 minutes to do this now. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson. I hope you found it informative, and I look forward to speaking to you tomorrow. Have a lovely rest of your day.